Welcome to the Flore Fantasy and Sci-Fi Lore. We are continuing our Fallout series today. We're going to be diving into the story and lore of the first game as we move forward. We are going to be talking about the journey to Vault 15. We're going to talk about Shady Sands and the death of the Khans and how that leads to the rise of the new California Republic. So if that is what you're looking for, this is the episode for you. Roll the intro.
Do you remember the first story that was so spellbinding it drove you to break the rules and stay up all night to keep reading, keep watching, keep playing? So good, you forgot your life and lived there?
So good, the moment it ended, you asked yourself, what next?
Welcome to the Flore. Our goal is to take you back, take you deeper, to explore and understand more and relive that childlike wonder.
Join us as we dive deep into humanity's greatest stories, no matter how they are told, through books, movies, television, even games.
One of us does an in-depth research on the topic. One of us is familiar with the topic.
And one of us knows nothing. So the right questions will always be asked and addressed for anyone coming into the topic, regardless of how much you know.
Enjoy another world, another adventure, another spellbinding story. Join us on the Flore. Welcome back to Flore Fallout Edition. We are going to begin now moving through the lore, starting with the first game. So we've done a lot of the backstory and the events kind of leading up to it. We did an episode on the Brotherhood of Steel, but really only up until the point that the first game takes place. They have moved down to the Lost Hills bunker, and that is where you will encounter them in the first game. So now moving forward, we will cover the lore points as they occur. We will still be releasing some shorts on various factions, but once again, a lot of that will be kind of like lore outside of the games, right? Moving through the lore of the Brotherhood of Steel in the games as it happens, we will go through as we go through the games. That is where we're going to begin. Now, some of this is going to be revision because we covered a fair amount of this in our introductory episode, but we will kind of go over it here in case somebody's like, I don't care about the building of Fallout, I just want the lore of the games, right? If that's what you want, we are going to cover that here. Within the Fallout world, we know that there was a battle over the resources, uranium and oil, that happened. Within that, you had the safe house plan, which built the vaults. And there was a decision to do experiments in those vaults. Initially, this was like, we have stripped the world of resources. If the bombs drop, it will also be an irradiated wasteland. We can't stay here. We will need to build a generational spaceship and move mankind to a new home. To do that, we need to understand what is the best way to put people in a closed space for generations. So that was the original idea behind the experiments within the vaults. However, to fund the vaults, they would then sold off experimentation power in some of those vaults to various corporations that wanted to do studies on people.
Strange ones.
Strange ones, yes. They did some really weird stuff, yes. So the bombs are dropped, and then 80 years later, so we know that the story begins when the water chip breaks and you are sent out into the wastes to find a way to either replace it or repair it. You were given a single piece of knowledge to help you on the journey, that nearby is Vault 15. The hope is that they may have the tools to repair your water chip, or they may have a replacement water chip. So whether you were the best candidate to leave the vault and find the new one, or you just drew the short straw, either way, you're
Or the most willing. Right?
Yeah, I guess maybe
Just like, I want out of here. I'm sick of living down in the hole.
What we're going to be moving through here in the story of Fallout is what we call the canon. And a canon occurs two ways. So at some point, a storyteller may just say, these are canon events. Now, the reason we're talking canon is because in Fallout, you can solve problems a lot of different ways. And so in one of the first big canon events, I will walk you through all the different ways you can approach that problem and solve it. And then I'll tell you the canon. And then going forward, we will only cover the canon. But just be aware that if you played the game, you may have made different choices than the canon. And if you do decide to go play it and you haven't played before, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You don't have to follow this path. So the canon comes up either one, the storyteller says, this is canon, essentially saying this is now part of the history of that world going forward and can be back referenced. Or in the making of other games, they decide to insert a reference to a previous event and they have to choose a specific outcome. So, and that's kind of how things go down with the event we will talk about here today. So that's what we mean by canon. These are the events that become the history of this world, though it actually happened as opposed to all the many different choices you could have made along the way. And you probably made some choices that are different than canon. Like, I think very few players follow the canon through and through, right?
Right.
Either because one, you just weren't even aware that some of those were an option, or two, it was just too difficult to follow that path based on your skills and abilities at that time.
Or you simply made a choice early on that
didn't
changed it, and now you're just on a different path.
Yeah. So that's what we mean when we're talking canon, and that's what we're going through here. So they kick you out of the vault. Now you don't know nothing going out. Vault 13 is aware that not too far to the east there was another vault, Vault 15. And if they are like your vault, they had at least 2 water chips. So the hope is that their water chip didn't fail, and you can get the spare water chip from them. So that's kind of the original plan. So start out, you head east, and on the way there, you will encounter a small little farming community called Shady Sands directly on your way. Now, there are a few very important people you are going to meet in Shady Sands. You will meet Aradesh, who is somewhere between a mayor and a chieftain of Shady Sands, his daughter Tandy, and I will cover their stories more in depth when we get to them. And you will meet someone named Katrina. Now, Katrina and Aradesh are from Vault 15, and the original settlers of Shady Sands are from Vault 15.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And she's going to tell us 2 really important things. One, she's going to teach us about stem packs. And this is a really interesting point about stem packs, because it's like either this was a pre-world technology that wasn't widespread, so it wasn't included in your vault. 2, it's a post-world technology, right? It comes about after the bombs are dropped. Or 3, it was part of the experimentation not to give you this incredible medical tool in your vault, right? Mm-hmm. One of those 3 things. Now, given that stem packs kind of appear in vaults all across, it's very likely the third one. It's intentionally left out of Vault 13 as part of their experimenting process.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, in the new TV show, stem packs are in her vault.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Now, the other thing she tells us is that Nuka-Cola caps are used as currency.
Yeah.
Wait, but it's bigger than that. The reason Nuka-Cola caps are used as currency is because the water merchants that work out of a city called the Hub back them, right?
It's backed by water.
It's backed by water. Yeah. That's why caps are traded in the Wastelands. They were backed by clean water.
Which is the most valuable thing there is.
Yeah, it's like that. That's the thing you die in days without. Radiation exposure will kill you in months to a year. Starvation in a couple weeks. Water, days.
Yeah.
So that clean water, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they decide to use Nuka-Cola caps as currency is the reason that they're traded across the Wastelands. That makes perfect sense. Be like, oh yeah, they're backed by clean water. Not by golds, not by commodities, clean water.
Yeah. And they also would be more resilient for a tougher world.
Yeah.
I imagine if you highly irradiated paper, it would go bad.
Well, it would probably erode the ink.
Right. It was the caps.
They're hardier. Yeah, hardier. Well, and so within Shady Sands, playing as a player, for me, and I know a lot of people who played the original Fallout when or pretty close to its release date, it's one of the first times you encounter dealing with a barter system. And you learn that bartering sucks immediately. Currency, like at 10 minutes of trying to barter your way through Fallout, you're like, Currency's amazing. I understand why they're done because barter sucks. Like, it is so hard to get a good deal. It is so hard to get a good deal.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Not only that, but like some people be like, "Well, I don't want that." They're like, "That's what I've got, man. Come on, we need to make a trade here."
Right. You hold on to the caps as a little bit of currency to smooth out, to get you smooth deals.
Yeah,
So you're not getting ripped off just because you absolutely need that thing.
yeah. So it really is a real like in the face view of mankind before we go into currency, and why every civilization did. They're like, yeah, currency, you need it. You got to smooth these transactions. They're just too brutal. And, I think it's really interesting that it is the water merchants who bring that to the Wasteland. They're like, we've got what everybody needs. We can make currency.
Okay.
So, all right. So, yeah. So that was a really big lore point there, is not just that we deal in caps, but why do we deal in caps? And as the Wasteland expands, they just continue the tradition of using caps. Right. I assume that at some point it's no longer, just because the water merchants are backing it, but a lot of people, eventually everybody's using it. And so it's just backed by the existence of its use.
Right. Well, once it's established, but how you get it off the ground is backed up by something very valuable that people need and want.
So we're going to journey to Vault 15, and through conversations in the Shady Sands, through things we discover in Vault 15, through events in Fallout 2, we are going to learn about the experiments that take place in Vault 15. So Vault 15, they wanted to take people with wildly different ideologies and cram them together. And the vault doors were supposed to open in 50 years right after the bombs drop. So it's 50 years, your doors open, you go out. Like they weren't choosing to open. However, the vault doors don't open until 64 years after. So they stay in there 14 years longer than they're supposed to. As we're exploring the inside of the vault, we can see that there have been explosions not blowing doors in, but blowing doors out. We learn that these differences in ideology led to physical conflicts within the vault that eventually destroyed the vault so that they could no longer stay in it, including their water chips and everything. And the members of Vault 15 and their descendants break off into 4 groups. We have the farming community in Shady Sands. We have the raiders that are the Khans, the raiders that are the jackals, and the raiders that are the vipers.
I can't remember this, yeah.
So that's what happened to Vault 15. They become all these different groups. Naturally, we don't get a water chip. And when we return to Shady Sands, we learn that Aradesh, the chief/mayor's daughter Tandy, has been kidnapped by the raiders, and he asks us for help. Like, they don't have fighters. The fighters in their group became the raiders, right? These were the non-fighters people. So not only that, but the raiders often raid Shady Sands, and a lot of times they feel like they have a right to be like, no, we're a community. We share everything. What they have is ours. We're just taking our share. Right, even though they are not producing anything or sharing anything with Shady Sands, they still just come in and take their food and water all the time.
Yeah, they're like, we're out there fighting all the beasts that now you don't have to fight, so that's our share.
That's our share, yeah. So the group that specifically has taken Tandy is the Khans. Now, when there's a big canon event that is going to happen here, and that is the rescue of Tandy. So I'm going to walk through all the different ways you can kind of do this to show you how it works, but then I will tell you the canon event. And like I said, as we go through the rest of the story, we will only do canon events, but understand there are multiple ways you can approach any of these things going.
Let's do that when we come back from commercial.
Oh. So we're back. We're talking the canon lore events of Fallout 1. Tandy has just been kidnapped by the raiders, which doesn't sound like a big lore event, but when I explain everything after, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's a big lore event, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we go to the Khans to rescue her, there are a couple ways we can go about this. You can sneak in, free her, and then just both flee back to Shady Sands. You cannot rescue her and join the Khans. Right, and just leave her as a prisoner. You can trick the Khans into thinking you're their former leader who they thought had died, and then come back and take over and then free Tandy or not, your choice.
Uh-huh.
You can offer to buy her back, like you can barter, and if you've got some caps, kind of try to equal value and then buy her from the raiders, or you can kill all of the raiders.
Of course, always an option.
So the final event, the killing of all the raiders, is the canon version of these details. Tandy is a very important character in the Fallout universe, and when she recounts this event, this is how it went down. The Vault Dweller came in and just murdered all of them.
Okay.
Now, not only is that important because that's how Tandy retells the event, but it completely reshapes the future of Shady Sands. Shady Sands is surrounded by 3 raider groups that were former members of Vault 15. Vipers, Khans, and Jackals. Right? After the slaughter of the Khans, raiders are afraid of Shady Sands. They are afraid that the Vault Dweller will come for them. And so for decades, raiders avoid Shady Sands. The community is able to thrive. People who are civic-minded, who want a peaceful life, learn that you go to Shady Sands, and the city and this tiny little village begins to swell into a very big, very prosperous city because of the slaughter of the Khans.
They've got a boogeyman now.
They got a boogeyman. Yeah, be like, don't go to Shady Sands. 13 will come for you.
Yeah.
But because of this peaceful time period after the slaughter of the Khans and how that leads to this very rapid growth, Shady Sands becomes a very big, thriving city to the point that it'll eventually start to incorporate other cities. So no longer is it just a city, it becomes a nation. And that nation is the New California Republic. When it is first formed, Aradesh, the little tribal mayor chieftain dude, is its president, and he will die shortly in office, and then his daughter will be elected in his place, and Tandy will rule the New California Republic for 10 consecutive terms and die in office.
Oh, wow.
He will take a tiny little farming town, and part of the reason is that for all the growth and everything that happened, while Aradesh was technically the leader, everyone knew that it was Tandy who was actually leading them, right? From the get-go, it was always her. She was ambitious and driven. She wanted to see the world and wanted other people to have that opportunity, and that meant trade routes, and it meant safe routes. And so she was just a really big driver in this. And so, they begin to just gobble up cities into their nation as they grow bigger and more powerful. Eventually, they stop using caps and they use New California script, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Particularly because they restart manufacturing, right? And you can't have bottle caps as your currency if you've got four industries that can just pump them out if they wanted to, right? Like, it doesn't work anymore. So they have to shift to a new currency that is controlled by the government, so you can't just print your own.
But then we do run into the problem of not everyone takes that currency, right? And now you have to walk around with multiple currencies as you transverse.
The reason for that is because the Fallout games don't take place in the New California Republic. Whenever you play a Fallout game, maybe part of the game is in the Republic, but the rest of the game is not. So when you're playing on the West Coast, you'll interact with the Republic, and you'll need the script to interact with them, but they're not the only faction you're working with. So when you're on the border of the Republic, you need another currency. But if you're just in the Republic, you wouldn't need anything other than New California Republic script. It's part of where the game is taking place for us. That now you need 2 currencies in your pocket instead of 1. The freaking NRC making me carry these everywhere. But and so that's the canon event, and that's why that canon event is so important, because it has this chain reaction. 1, Tandy lives rather than being a sex slave for the raiders for years to come, and 2, it completely changes the future of Shady Sands, because the raiders, which are a crippling effect on so many economies, are not an issue for them for a long time to come. So back to Fallout 1, right? So we've rescued Tandy, we've put in motion the beginning of the NCR, and Then the Vault Dweller will head to Junktown. Now, Junktown is a junkyard that they kind of built a town right next to so they could kind of pluck things from the yard, repair them, sell them. And so the hope is that somewhere in that junk, you might find a water chip. Right. Now, you don't find a water chip there. And Junkyard's role in the bigger canon is really only 2 points. One, it is the first city to be incorporated into Shady Sands, which takes it from city to nation, right? That is the moment it becomes the New California Republic instead of just Shady Sands.
Okay, yeah.
So that's its first place in the canon that's important. The second point that makes Junktown important in the canon is that across the rest of the games, you'll encounter a book called Tales of a Junktown Jerky Trader. And unlike the other books in Fallout that you find that look like old books from the old world, this looks like a hand-drawn book. The lore point here is that Junktown is actually a real place, and you do visit it in the first Fallout. You don't meet a jerky trader, but you do meet a guy selling iguana bits. But
that aren't iguana.
Right? That are not iguana. Yeah.
That are human bits.
And the final lore point for Junktown is that this is where you will encounter the dog meat. And there is not a lot known about his origin. What happens is there is a man who is unable to return to his home because the dog is there growling, angry, and refusing to move. What little the owner of the home can tell you is that the owner of the dog came from somewhere in the Far East, and he wore a black leather jacket. There are then 2 ways to recruit dog meat. You can either feed him, or if you have found the black leather jacket, you can wear it, and he seems to think that you are his old master. And that is how you meet dog meat in Fallout 1, but he will come back around. So there are some conflicting lore points around dog meat. We will talk about those more as we encounter them. But that is where we will leave Junktown. One last thing I was going to mention here. So in the Fallout TV show, we've got some spoilers here. We will encounter one. We see that one of the main characters survives a nuclear blast in a fridge when he's a kid. And then later in the show, we will see Shady Sands has been nuked out, and they had over 300,000 people living in the city when that happened.
I think it was 30,000. 300,000?
300,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was the biggest city in the NCR, like probably the biggest city in the world.
Yeah.
Right? The New California Republic. And we will also encounter a vault that is not a United States vault. It is an NCR vault.
Like they had taken over the vault?
Taken over, or maybe they just built one. Because you have to understand, the fall of Shady Sands is about 200 years after the bombs are dropped the first time, right? That's almost as far as we are from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Not only that, but they did have to deal with radiation and a wasteland, but at the same time, there was a lot of that science they didn't have to figure out from nothing, right? We already knew how to solve those puzzles. You just needed the pieces.
Right, and they might have found, Vault Tech didn't finish all of their vaults.
Right.
So they might have found an unfinished one. They might have found a place where they were manufacturing parts for a vault. And then been like, all right.
Yeah, so it could have been any of those. They took that for an old one. They finished one that wasn't finished. Either way, we do encounter a vault that is not a United States vault, but a vault built during the NCR.
Interesting.
And the history taught there is not American history. It is the history of Shady Sands.
Right. The
New California Republic. Yeah. So those are 2 things we encounter. And so we do know that Shady Sands has a nuclear bomb dropped on it. And it's possible that all the major cities of the New California Republic were, which is kind of what resets the Fallout world. And that is something I like about the TV show because, like I said, with the thriving of Shady Sands and us being, like I said, we are as far from the first drop of the bombs as we are now from the birth of the Industrial Revolution. It's like, how is it still, bottle caps and Wasteland? But if it's only like 20 years ago the bombs were dropped, then you understand how are we still in the Wasteland? Be like, we're not still in the Wasteland. We reset the Wasteland.
Yeah, we got a refresher on that one.
Yeah, we need a refresher on it. Those are the events of Junktown, and then that will lead us to the hub, where the water merchants who back the bottle caps come from. And we'll cover that in our next episode.
All right.
So, for our treasure in question, we covered all the different ways that the Tandy event can go down. Question is, what did you do, or what would you do, and then extrapolate the long-term events of that? Because we look at what happens if you kill all the raiders, and we see the long-term of that is you get the thriving metropolis of Shady Sands, the birth of the new California Republic. All of that comes out of the slaughter of the cons, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if you take a different path? Talk about that in the treasure room. May the water you drink in the desert not shine at you in the night. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We have mentioned in the past that if you go to the Patreon page, we have collections of all the different worlds and pieces of lore we have covered. For example, if you want everything we have ever done about Baldur's Gate, from the invention of D&D to Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Dark Alliance, all of that, you can find individual collections for all of those, or just one big collection containing all of Baldur's Gate or all of D&D. So everything we have covered, Eberron, Marvel, DC, Aliens, Xenoverse, Cyberpunk, Dune, and more. We have collections for each of those worlds. And I do want to mention that on the Patreon, the only thing behind the subscription is the treasure room content. Anything that has been released in the podcast for free is still free there. It is just a better organization of the information that the podcast app doesn't let us do. They are just a big list, and you just got to type in your search words. On the Patreon, there are tags for everything. You got fantasy, D&D, creature features, Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Dark Alliance, all of that. Just an individual tag for those episodes. And as I said, we do have collections just to make this as easy as possible to find what you're looking for. We have learned in the past that a lot of people who listen to The Flore, they're interested in one or two of the worlds, and they may check out one or two of the episodes when we switch worlds, but they're really just mostly interested in that. So we just want to consolidate everything you're looking for to make it just as easy as possible to access. So check that out just to make your life easier. And we are working at making sure you can download any of the free episodes there. So even if you're going to lose Wi-Fi or connection, you can get the episodes you want before that happens, or just not burn your data while you're traveling to and from work or whatever else is you do while you listen. And thank you. I hope you continue to enjoy the show.